Hello. This meeting is being recorded. I'd like to welcome you all to CODA's webinar on entitled "Are You Ready for September 19th? Navigating the Next Phase of U.S. Organic Enforcement," or the SOE. Uh, Today, I will be presenting. My name is Maylene Bosch. I'm the Government Relations and Regulatory Affairs Manager at CODA. Appreciate everyone joining us today on such short notice. In case you haven't seen the slides, the presentation slides will be shared after the presentation, as well as the webinar recording. So it looks like we've got, with this topic today, we've got quite a big interest in it. It's something we've got farmers, associations, manufacturers, certifiers, government. So, and on such scheduling such a meeting with such short notice, this is very indicative of the importance of the topic and I guess the information that everyone's trying to obtain on it. So today's webinar is I'll be looking at sharing the latest information on the importer of record, the new requirements for US bound exports. So you notice that today we don't necessarily have government with us or the NOP. We're not attempting to speak on behalf of the NOP, but we've had a number of discussions in the last month and a half to try to clarify what the requirements are, what the implications would be for industry. And seeing that the September 19th deadline is just around the corner, we wanted to make sure that we could get out as much information as we could to you so that you could react to that. A lot of the information that we have that we'll be sharing today, um, you will be receiving additional information later as well in writing. I believe that CFA will be putting out a notice around it, but we wanted to be able to share what we could today so that you could be able to react. So the other thing I would like to mention is that through our discussions, we don't have all the answers. So this strengthening organic enforcement regulation the rule is quite a large one, and there's a lot involved in it. And definitely all the stakeholders in the organic value chain have been um, very busy over the last 2 years trying to understand the rule, comply to the rule, get everything ready for it. And so there are still many questions out there. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to provide the information that we have. And also what we'd like to do in today's webinar is gather questions that you might have, because our intention is to see what other issues that are out there and really advocate on behalf of our members and share what those issues are and try to get a little bit more clarity from USDA NOP on next steps and what to expect. So with that said, I'll just note that this webinar, as I said, the SOE rule is very comprehensive. It's the most significant rule that was implemented in the US since the organic uh, regulations first came into effect. And it's got a lot of great objectives and cracking down on fraud, ensuring organic integrity, and really making sure that we've got a really viable, credible organic system that will just continue to grow. So there's much related to the rule. We're not going to cover a lot of the nuances of it. There's information that's widely published in other areas. I'll refer you to there's a web page that USDA NOP has that has the links to the final rule and all the information in the background you could use. There's a fact that is up there now as well that will address some of the questions that you might have in today's webinar, as well as other ones. CODA, we hosted a webinar with the USDA NOP June last year to try to be able to just provide an overview of it, of the whole rule, so that people could then go into more detail and see what the implications and everything were. But so this is a broad overview. So the webinar and the slides are available as well on our YouTube channel. And finally, CFIA has some guidance as well. So I guess the other thing I would note is the certifiers, your certification bodies have been very, very much involved in this process throughout. really scrambling and really working very hard to get the operators, organic operators, ready and prepared for the new rules. And so there's a lot of guidance that they're providing as well. And they have a lot more details in terms of some of the specifics. And just like we've recommended since the start is if you are part of the organic value chain and you are exporting to the US, your certification body is definitely a key resource for you. So just really quickly, so a broad, simple overview of the SOE timeline. So basically, the final rule was published January of 2023 with March 19th, 2024 as the implementation deadline. So throughout that time, new systems were put in place, a lot of education, webinars, communications, trying to get industry prepared for the new rules. We also have another deadline timing that we have on this chart is so basically the March 19th implementation deadline was meant to be a softer deadline in the sense that um, uh, the NOP was taking more of an approach of an educational approach, making sure that people were working towards compliance to the rule, and they have since published that in September, 6 months after the rule was the implementation deadline was there, and the rule was to come into effect, would be where system flexibilities within within and allowances within the organic integrity database would be gone basically. So this is really seen as when you hear people talking about the September 19th deadline, technically March 19th was the deadline for implementation, but the September 19th is the one that we're watching now because that's where there were allowances provided previously to allow business and trade to still happen, and many of those will no longer be available as in 2 weeks' time, really. So that's basically what we know. One thing that what we have seen in Canada that is really the subject of today's webinar is that in May or June of this year, so late May, early June, there were clarifications from the USD NOP that related to the importer of record. So basically, the importer of record would have to have NOP certification regardless of where they were located and regardless of whether or not an equivalency arrangement was put in place. So of course, this was something very new and took many operators by surprise because basically a lot of the communication before had indicated that certification would be required as a result of the NOP, the SOE. So really two of the key changes that we see with the new SOE rule was number one was that all organic shipments to the US would have to have an import certificate, an electronic import certificate with it from an NOP one, National Organic Program. And the second key one that impacted industry was that a lot more stakeholders in the organic value chain would have to be certified organic. And so some traders, custom brokers, import folks, some of these other stakeholders had never had to be, and the new rule would be requiring it as well. So those were two key changes. And with the import of record, the new clarification that came in May of this year, many companies and operators before thought that because the communication was that you had to have certification, that the equivalency arrangement between Canada and US and core certification would be sufficient. And so what came about in May was that this would no longer be sufficient, and that even if you had core certification, you would have to be an NOP certified if you wanted to act as an importer of record for exports to the US. So the other timing that we're working as we quickly move towards the September 19th one is there's been many discussions with industry CODA wrote a letter to NOP describing what the concerns are, because the more that we delved into it, we really saw that this was becoming a big issue and that would impact a lot of operators in Canada who are exporting. We've had, I believe, two meetings with them. We've had some back and forth communications. We've also had discussions with CFIA, Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada, Global Affairs. We've reached out to even our trade partners who might be in the same situation to understand what the breadth and the scope of this issue was, and also to better understand who would be impacted, what were the scenarios, what were the kind of situations and considerations. In doing this as well, we reached out to some of the provinces as well as certification bodies and specific companies too. So all of this has been really great in helping us better understand the situation. We've gone back to NOP and advocated really for flexibility in the September 19th timeline, because the reality is if we only learned about the clarification in May, for many companies, this would be almost impossible. So this is a question that we have in terms of what would there be flexibility? And if there was, what would it be? So what exactly was the clarification that we received in May? So what you'll see with a lot of this presentation is with much of this with the SOE rule, it's been challenging to get really specific answers to direct questions from the government, and that's normal in most new regulations that come about. So what I've tried to do is really quote where these things are coming from and using the language of the regulators. So I won't go into detail a lot in terms of what they say. We won't read through it, but just highlighting some of them, and you can peruse them on your own time later after I provide the slides. So basically, the clarification was that importers of organic products into the US must be certified under the USDA organic regulations by USDA accredited certifier. So including if the operations were physically located outside of the US, that are acting as the import of record, regardless of any certifications that they hold. And another thing that was with that was depending on operations activities, they may need to hold more than one certification. So this is significant because I think for most of us who are operating with the US-Canada equivalency arrangement, this has been something that's really facilitated trade and really has allowed country like US, Canada, and the countries that we have equivalency arrangements with to be able to just certify to one standard and not have to have dual certification with all the extra costs, the time, all of that that's involved with that. So this was quite a different note for us as well. And one of the questions that we had asked, so that was basically the clarification is from the FAQ or the Q&A that the USDA NOP has on their website. So that's that text. But one of the questions that we had was, where is this actually found in the SOE rule? Because we were challenged to find it as well. So basically, it is in the organic regulations themselves around the importer that the NOP certification is required. And basically, there is a carve out in another part of the regulation that allows for equivalency. So one of the things that we've been told is that the import export requirements is part of the broader USDA organic regulations, including import of record, and that carve out for equivalencies is part of a different part, and so not necessarily underneath. So it's not necessarily that it trumps the requirement for what's required for imported products. So just to clarify, who is the importer record, what is it, and what are their responsibilities? So basically in the importer record, there was definition that was published in the SOE that is very of an organic importer, which is very analogous to the definition of the import of record that's used by Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. So it's basically the operation responsible for accepting imported organic agriculture products within the US and ensuring NOP import certificates and data are entered into the customs systems of record. So basically, that's what it is. And it's not just a definition that's out there. It's something that comes with it legal responsibilities and accountability. So the importer of record would also need to take a look at, verifying that the products coming in have NOP certification. They'd have to calculate and figure out and pay for any taxes, duties, or fees that are related to any of that. They've got some requirements to ensure that regular requirements are met and that any documentation that's required is that they meet those regulatory requirements, a lot of paperwork, and they do have a registration with your authorities so that they can take a look at that. And this will come up again later because we've been talking a lot about import of record and just becoming an import of record. And I think one of the things that we just want to underline is from a business perspective, business reasons, this may be the best option, but just to underline that there are responsibilities and liabilities that are related to it that everyone should be aware of. So one of the things that in looking at this issue, we asked the question, well, why was there confusion? How come throughout, these since January 2023, this issue is only coming to light, towards May, that it's being clarified. And now there's suddenly this very short timeline to comply. So one of the things that we saw was there was a confusion between product certification versus handling certification. So the Canada-US equivalency agreement or arrangement applies to the product certification. So manufacturing and production of the organic product. That if it's manufactured or produced in Canada, it has to have core certification. Then there's the handling certification that then comes with the activity that you have when it relates to imports. And so with the SOE, there were new requirements put on handlers, and these handlers include, people who are involved in trade, export, import, and this is where the import of record, specifically that requirement, has been a challenge, and anyone who facilitates the sale or trade of an organic product. So some of these new stakeholders who have had to get organic certification, this is where that comes into. So the handling is not necessarily under the purview of the Canada-US equivalency arrangement. It really is under the US, their other regulations. The second thing that we found was that it was not clarified very much in the documentation. We saw a lot of the guidance documents, a lot of the supplementary documents that were published, that the importer of record had to be certified specifically to NOP. And that's a reason why a lot of Canadian exporters and operators thought, you know what, a lot of the documentation says you have to have organic certification, and the equivalency arrangement would cover that. And so unfortunately, looking at what that's been communicated, it does not cover that. And the import of record must have NOP certification. The third major confusing point that we found were that there's a number of stakeholders within the chain that were considered low risk activities, and some of these are exempt. So a big one, for example, is retailers. So any, for example, Canadian exporters selling directly to a retailer, retailers are exempt from certification. But traders, custom brokers, importers, those activities are not exempt. And so this is a challenge where the retailer, if they're dealing with tamper-proof products and they're not your custom broker and they're not your importer of record, they would be exempt. But as long as they're performing this importing function, then suddenly they need to get NOP or if they're your import of record, they would have to have NOP certification. So that has been a challenge. And what we have found is many exempt customers, such as retailers, they either don't want to take the responsibility of becoming the importer of record, as we've seen, there are some liabilities around that, and legalities around it, or they didn't want to become NOP certified, because why would you want to if you're exempt? And one of the challenges is some of this communication has come very late in the game. We've heard some companies that they only heard last week, that their importer of record was refusing to become NOP certified and that they would have to figure out a way. So definitely this has been a big challenge for a number of Canadian companies. So moving on then, so what are the challenges to compliance by September 19th? And we've conveyed a lot of this already to our colleagues at NOP, and to better explain the situation and the unique situation that Canadian exporters are going through. Because what we have found is, because of the nature of the trade between Canada and US, there actually are a lot of importers of record that are either Canadian operators or they're selling directly to retailers or those kind of things, that if you're exporting across, an ocean or something, you don't have as many of those issues. So first one is communications. The clarity on the requirement didn't come until much later, from what I understood. Even, the question around whether or not a no-pick would be based on a product or an importer was already, a question in January. As late as early May, we were still under the impression that the importer of record could be core certified, and that would be sufficient. So this clarification came very late. And then once that came out, just getting the word out to industry, because, contacting everybody. There's been, as the regulations have been coming through, people have been understanding more about what the guidance around it has been, and what to expect. And so being able to share that. So if you think, here in May, and then that's when you find out, and maybe you're just not really even confirmed or in writing until, maybe June, then you've got to get that word out. Then you got to bring it down your supply chain. And so that was one big one. Another issue is, even if you wanted to become NOP certified, there's few certifiers in Canada that are accredited to NOP, and there's a number of barriers to even get more accreditation. And so there are, so to get more certifiers accredited. So that's an issue, and we've brought that up to NOP as well. Even because of the scope and the breadth of the SOE rule, the US accredited NOP certifiers have also been just backlogged as well. So you can just imagine everybody's trying to make these the same timelines, and when more information comes out and that information is shared up and down the supply chain, it just results in a lot of work, and just more time for things. Typically, it would take several months to get NOP certified under ideal conditions if you wanted to. So that was already a challenge. And as I mentioned before, sometimes when you did find out that your importer of record was not NOP certified and you had to communicate it, sometimes they would refuse to be. And so with such short notice, this has left some companies trying to figure out what to do. And also another option would be, well, what if you were to just look for an NOP importer of record that's based out of the US? Well, there's some challenges around that as well. Even if you were to take a look at the Organic Integrity Database, it doesn't specify that operator is an importer of record. It only states that they're a handler. But of course, we know that, a handler can mean many things. And with the different types of products you have and all of that, there's a lot more complexity. So it's not as easy to find out exactly who you could approach. So just noting that, as the timeline rolls, even just as recently as I guess last month, communications have been coming through just to inform industry about this new guideline, this new or this new rule, and the temporary filing code that was allowing companies to continue to do business after the March 19th deadline, that is supposed to no longer be available. That we're seeing that some companies are being advised to, export their product without organic certification so that they don't have any issues. It's definitely this is bigger than I think probably it wasn't appreciated how big this issue actually was, and so we're trying to deal with that. So after some discussion, some back and forth, we did receive clarity. So last week, with a memo from USDA NOP to CODA, and as I mentioned, there will be a memo that's going to be very similar that will be coming out shortly, I imagine. And basically, it's just a recognition of what we have been communicating to them about the short timelines for industry and how difficult it is, and what their temporary measure could be. So I think one thing that was very, very much underscored was this is not something that this measure is not supposed to be permanent. It's not going to be something that they're going to keep. Their intention is still to have all importers of record to have NOP certification. But with that recognition, they have indicated that core certified operations acting as the U.S. importer of record will be able to use their core listing in the USDA's Organic Integrity Database in the recipient section. So that's where you usually would indicate the importer of the NOP import certificate, and that they haven't changed the OID system to block this option, but they expect that all operators who are using this measure will continue to diligently pursue USD certification. There's no time that's been set. That's one of the questions that I think the first one, and many of you in the questions to us had asked, how much time, what would a flexibility mean? And they haven't indicated that. So basically, they're just saying that they're going to be closely monitoring it and seeing what's going on, and that Canadian businesses should comply ASAP. So all of that in summary is basically temporary measure is that if you are a Canadian importer of record and you're certified to CORE, so the Canadian Organic Standard, but you're not yet certified to NOP as an importer of record, you can temporarily use this flexibility that they've indicated. But they expect that we will continue to diligently pursue NOP certification if this is your scenario. And at the same time, any other scenarios where Canadian operators are acting as an importer of record, you should complete your USD organic certification ASAP as well to get that NOP certification. So that's really the guidance that we've been provided. I think that's the nugget or the piece that we learned that we really wanted to get out to you as soon as possible. We know that many companies are working hard to make this work and working with their certifiers to make sure that we're compliant. And one thing that I think in our conversations, the USDA had always said is that this was not, the intention was not to, bear down on those that are certified organic and are doing business and trying to comply. It's really to try to address those who are not certified in the value chain. So in terms of that, there's really two key options based on the new information and the clarity that we've received to comply to this new requirement. So the first one is to sell via an importer of record in the US who is certified to NOP. Now this has its challenges. We've spoken to a number of stakeholders, and what we've heard is that, how do you identify the importer of record? There's longstanding business relationships who you import and export to, and those things aren't always just broken down overnight. if you sell it to someone else, to a third party, you have less control over your process. You might have extra costs. You might have corporate policies that require you to use a foreign importer record. And there's some exempt retailers who are refusing to continue to be the importer of record prior to the new requirement, who are just letting some operators know now. And there's also proprietary information on documentation related to importer of record that could reveal your supply chain. So et cetera, et cetera. So many challenges that we've heard and that we've communicated as well to the USDA. Second option that you would have to comply would be to act as your own importer of record and to obtain the NOP handler certification and work with your certification body for this one. And of course, the challenges, legal and tax implications. We have questions around this as well, and that's what we're hoping after the webinar, and we've been able to collect some of your own questions. We'll be able to send some more questions back to USDA, and that's one of the questions that we have. Challenges, there's extra costs as well. There was some feedback that becoming your own import of record, all of that's costing more. Paperwork, dual certification, all et cetera, et cetera. Because your primary production will still have to be core certified. It's now your import activity that would be NOP certified. So again, we understand this is a business decision, but boiling it down, those were what kind of came down to it. But the options are. So with that, that's the formal part of the presentation that was recorded. And I wanted to just go through maybe some of the questions that you have, and we'll take off the recording at that point. And I would love for this to be kind of an open dialogue session so that we can better understand what the issues are, the scenarios, what are you facing, so that in our continued discussions to make sure that trade continues smoothly and that there's the minimal impact to Canadian businesses, that we really get your feedback. So we'll just stop the recording. Okay. I'm just gonna see how that works. Hold on one second. Okay, so